Hi, Zoe.
Hey, George. I didn't know if I was visible or not.
Everyone comes in blind, and then we can open up. So, how was the rest of your day?
Mostly good. I keep thinking things are, if things would just like keep going, and then something weird happens. So yeah, it's like I know. Always some unexpected tripwire, but again, for the most part, it's good. And, like I feel like a big weight's off my shoulders after the inaugural. So it's like, yeah, right. It's hard to complain at this point.
Maybe we can get back to at least not being completely consumed by existential angst, right?
Yes, exactly. So, that's exactly it.
No, it's interesting actually. We the club we just started. I mean, because last year was really bad for us, and but we'll be fine. But it's interesting. Like we've just started our long range planning committee, which I'm sitting on, and just starting to have these conversations. I don't know if Hong mentioned to you, but my job is changing. Will change significantly in the next month or so, which is great. I'll update you when that gets made public. Really thinking about restructuring all of our member facing and community engaging departments. So yeah, it just seems like an interesting point in time.
Yeah.
So, I keep saying, out of the frying pan and into the fire for 2021, but we'll get there.
Yeah, well, there's opportunities. It's just, getting through the mess to get to them. That's tricky, but no, that's great. Well, I hope your new role is exciting and good. So
yeah, fingers crossed anyway. So I guess we're all good to go. When we open the meeting, I think you and Hong just turn off your
I'm gonna mute.
and then and I've got my little script here. So we'll just get Nick in, and I'm sure it'll be great.
Okay, great. Well, again, you have my cell. You can get me in the chat. I'll be here. And then
it's just joining, so great.
Terrific. There we go.
And I'm going to make you co-host as well. Hi, Michael.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Hi, I'm George. I'm the Director of Collections at the University Club. So nice to meet you virtually.
Yeah, likewise.
And, I don't know. Hong coming in now. I'm going to ask her to unmute. Ask her to start video.
I'll put my good background on.
Hey, Michael.
Hello.
Well, Michael, you guys haven't met George, and with University Club, and Michael's a member, of course, along with his wife, and it's nice and close. And Zoe is the director of academics at Graham School, and she's my go-to person. Anything that happens at Graham, go to her.
Okay, good to know.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Michael is, I don't want to get too much into it. We can talk about, how's Janice?
She's good.
Yeah.
She's on the phone, otherwise I should say hi.
Oh, say hi.
She's on her own. She's on another Zoom call, so.
Oh, okay. Actually, Steve offered, we'll talk about that later. Steve said, whatever you want to, sweets you want, he's going to make you some.
Oh, very nice.
Anyways.
So we're just waiting for Nick, and then I think we're all good. Michael, I just want to confirm that it's pronounced Liu family chairman. Liu is the...
Yeah, Liu is, yeah, I believe that's right.
Okay.
Yep.
So just to give you a quick run through, basically we're gonna open at 6. The members will come in, everyone's cameras and microphones are turned off and they won't be able to turn them on. We're going to wait a few minutes. We have a couple of slides to show. Then I'm going to say hi to everyone. I don't know if you've participated in any of our coming up year-long online programming. So it'll be me saying hi to everyone. A lot of people will be very fed up with seeing my face. And then I will introduce you, and then if you want to introduce Nick, and then we can get started with the presentation. So.
Okay, and then I'm done, right? How are you handling questions?
So we are having questions put into the chat, and then I'm going to field them to Nick. So, and
right.
hopefully that.
So I can like turn my camera off and have dinner while Nick's talking.
Yeah, you can just relax afterwards. So you don't have to worry about anything. So that should be.
Well, maybe I'll send. I might send a nasty question or two just for fun.
Oh.
Since they're anonymous.
That's between you and Nick. I mean, right. So we won't get into that. But I really, Mike, I want to just on behalf of Graham School, thank you for, setting this up for us. It's the first of our speaker series.
Great.
And as you know, I mean, the University Club is full of very smart, curious people.
Yeah.
And we're hoping this will be, a good success story, and then we can find other interesting, topics.
Yeah, there's some people doing things I think people would find really fascinating. So, and the fact that it's happening in Chicago and good.
Well, we might have to lean on your goodwill and connections, because of course, I just was happy to have you. Being a friend, I could lean on and say, right. Yeah. But down the road, if we want to go on, University Club is looking for very high caliber faculty members as well as researchers.
Yep.
And you will be a great source. Plus, you're a member of the club, so.
Happy to do it, yeah.
If you can do that, then I will give you a free dinner.
Whoa.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, we haven't had dinner there for a while. We since obviously, but we did participate in the New Year's Eve dinner.
Oh, great!
Which is always nice. The best.
Oh, awesome! Oh, I'm so
excited. Well, it was takeout.
Yeah.
But it was good.
Yeah, we're actually going to do. If you're looking for something to do on Valentine's, we're doing the Valentine's dinner to go as good. Well.
That is a good idea. Okay.
Yeah, because Michael's doing kitchen remodeling. So.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, true. Nick is here, so let me just.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. Whoa.
I know.
Maroon.
Yeah, there we go. Let's try to go full red.
Nice.
Great.
Fabulous. Okay, I think we're all good. So, at 6, I'm just gonna share my screen for the couple of slides. We're gonna leave it for a few minutes, let everyone come in. As I said earlier, you're either early for a Zoom or you're late and you're never on time. So we'll let people kind of shuffle in, and then I'll start talking, and I think we'll all be fine. And then I'll just be managing the spotlights and everything as well. And then I think we're good to go. Any questions?
Well, Han, you and I are going to disappear, so.
Yeah, well,
put everything on mute.
I'll enjoy the recording. So unless you need us, let us know. Otherwise, we can, make some room, and then, right.
I'm gonna stay and listen. I'm just gonna put everything on mute. So
I will do that too. Okay. Well, thank you again to everybody, especially to Professor Feimster. So good luck.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, all right. It's such a pleasure.
Had a great talk.
Yeah, we'll have to get Nick to the club at some point.
I know,
for sure.
I have to go to this awesome place.
Yeah. And also, Nick wants to see inside of Mi's building. That could be arranged too. As soon as we're open for business, Mike, we'll have you guys over for dinner. Yeah. Well, Mike loves, he's been to our house. So if you want to see.
I'm like a huge Mi's fan, so.
Oh, there you go. You can see as much as you want. I'll give you a private
we should have just done it from your house.
All right. I'm out of here. So good luck.
Bye, Hong. Okay. So, well, we can just ease in just a few more minutes. Sorry.
You guys go. I was going to make small talk. You go ahead.
Oh, I was also going to make small talk. I was going to talk about Mies van der Rohe and him putting his, first initial into the corners of the buildings, right? If you actually look, it's an M.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Like a death mask.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll have to look. No, that's smaller than I was going to talk. I was going to ask about slides.
I have them.
You have slides, and is that what you're doing?
Yes, I do have slides.
Okay.
Oh yeah, maybe I should send them to George.
Yeah, if you just want to, so my email is price, Price at ucco.com. So if you want to send it to me in case anything, happens, then that's totally cool.
And then, Nick, are you going to talk about the data.org thing, or should I mention it in my intro?
Oh, you should mention it because I didn't like pump it directly, but the talk is basically responsive to that.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The timing couldn't have been better, actually, because that award was just announced this week, and we hadn't planned to win necessarily. Mike, they only picked 8 out of 1,250 applications.
What?
Yeah, so it was like, it's huge. Yeah. I mean, and we're like the only university picked. Maybe there's one in like Australia or something, but it's, we're like in rarefied air.
That's fantastic.
Okay. I have to note my husband is a UChicago grad, so I married into that that personality.
Oh, great.
He's actually also the former director for campaign communications years ago now.
Oh, okay. So you've already been hit up for donations, I assume.
Yeah. those phone calls.
You're on the list.
Freshmen. Well, it's a great performing program. 500 million a year, 450 development staff. I know way too much about this.
You do. That's more than I knew.
Great. Okay. What time are we coming up on? So we got a minute. Then I'll let people in. And Michael, just an FYI to you, Nick, as well. So I've now taken away the ability to unmute yourself. So when you mute yourself, you won't be able to unmute yourself. So don't do that until you don't want to talk.
Okay, really? So I'm going to do the intro and then I'll mute myself. And
then you'll be fine.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I love that shield. We're doing something with UCPE, and I've been using that template. George, in lieu of typing your email address, which I didn't have in my, I don't know, it wasn't coming up. I just put a link in the chat to slides so you can just grab them.
Yeah, just send it to me. I guess no one's gonna see it before. Yeah, you send it to me now, and then I'll let.
Yeah, I sent it to you now. I can send it to you directly too.
It's in the chat. Is that what you're
it's in the chat. Yeah.
Okay.
And Nick, how long have you been at Chicago? 2 years.
You're supposed to know that, but yeah, I came August 2019, so like a year and a half, right?
Okay. Well, I was telling the story about you running in the polar vortex, and I couldn't remember. That wasn't this winter. That was
during my interview. That would have been like January 2019. So yeah.
2019.
But then, yeah, I guess technically officially I started July 2019, but I worked in Princeton for a month. Okay. And now I've worked in my house for like a year. So thereby, I think I've officially worked more at my house than in Carrara.
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna let everybody in now. So bear with me and we'll get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Get settled. We'll get started in just a few minutes. So I hope you've poured yourself a glass of wine or whatever else you prefer. Okay. Well, why don't we get started? So hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's presentation, Mapping and Mitigating the Urban Digital Divide with Dr. Nick Feamster, Neubauer Professor of Computer Science and the Director of Center for Data and Computing. The Civic Affairs Society is pleased to present this lecture as part of our University of Chicago Speaker Series, developed in collaboration with the Graham School of Continuing Liberal and Professional Studies at the University of Chicago. I would like to encourage members to visit the club website to find out more about this upcoming programs in the series, including Hitchhiker's Guide to the Wonders of the Gut Microbiome with Dr. Eugene Chang. That's on February 18th. And the United States and China from Trump to Biden with Dr. Dali Yang. That's March 24th, as well as our suite of private Graham School classes for members that are being conducted online, including next month's class, American Short Story Masterpieces with Bruce Gans. I would like to thank Emily Lynn Osborne, Associate Professor of African History, African Studies, and the College, and Interim Dean of the Graham School for making this event and this series possible. So just to note, you are all muted, and for timekeeping, we'll be keeping questions to the end of Dr. Feamster's presentation. If you have a question, please pop it into the chat and I will field the question at the end. Finally, we are delighted to welcome Michael Franklin, Liu Family Chairman of Computer Science and Senior Advisor to the Provost for Computing and Data Science, who will introduce Dr. Feamster. Michael?
Great, well, thanks, George. So welcome to everybody, and it's nice to see you virtually. My wife and I have been members of the club for several years, and we look forward to seeing everybody in person, hopefully in the not too distant future. But tonight, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Nick Feamster, who's from the Computer Science Department at the University of Chicago. Nick is a Neubauer Professor of Computer Science, and he's the Director of the Center for Data and Computing at the university. Nick was previously on the faculty at Princeton University, and one of my great accomplishments as chair of computer science at Chicago was to lure him to Chicago. So thanks for that, Nick. But Nick has a very distinguished career working at the intersection of technology and policy. He is a fellow of the Association of Computing Machinery. He's received many other awards. The Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, called the PCASE Award. He was in the MIT Technology Review Top 30 Top Young Innovators Under 35. He's won a Sloan Research Fellowship, the National Science Foundation Career Award, IBM Faculty Fellowship, and the list goes on. The work that Nick's going to be talking about tonight has recently been recognized with an award from data.org, which recently held a competition for data science driven research for societal benefit. And the project Nick's going to be talking about tonight was, I believe, one of 8 winners out of over 1,000 projects that were proposed for this program. So just with that, I would like to turn things over to Nick. So welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Mike, for the great introduction. We're out of time.
All right, see you later.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm gonna share my screen, and I'll also do that in such a way that I can share sound because, oops. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, I think. Okay, there we go. We'll see if sound works. If not, we'll wing that part. Okay, so thanks, Mike, for the great introduction. It's a pleasure to be here speaking to this group. I hope to one day see you all in person. One of the reasons I'm very excited to talk about this project is I'm going to tell you about a little bit about the arc of my own research career in this talk. But part of why I wanted to come to the University of Chicago, and Mike told a little bit about the story of how he lured me here, but one of the things Mike told me when I was thinking about whether to come to the university was that he said, there's so many amazing pieces at this university, and you can do really great things if you figure out where they are and how to put them together. And I think this is a project that's really a testament to that. We're obviously just getting started. I've only been here for a year and a half, but I'm very excited about the progress that we've been able to make in this area with a very diverse group of researchers across many divisions at the university. I'll also mention that I think one of the things that got me so excited about the University of Chicago was the opportunity to define new fields of scholarship and apply that scholarship in areas where you can have real social impact. And I'm just having a great time working on this project so far. I think it has both, it has the potential for both of these angles. I think we're really blazing a new trail here. I think there's great opportunities for the University of Chicago to plant a stake and be a leader in this area. And what I think is certainly one of the moonshot challenges of our time, of our generation for sure. And, absolutely going to be a priority in the incoming administration, both in terms of inclusive innovation and infrastructure. Affordable, reliable, high-speed internet access is really no longer a luxury. It affects pretty much every life outcome you can think of, from education to health to opportunity. And, certainly we've been hearing stories about inequity for quite some time. And I think they've really come into focus over the past 12 months for a number of reasons. But I think additionally, the current pandemic situation has certainly brought this into further focus. We need only go so far as this talk, which I'm giving to you over a high-speed internet connection. And many of you are probably listening to the talk over a high-speed internet connection. So affordable high-speed internet access has really become the bedrock for just about every facet of life that affords us education, health, and opportunity. And yet, those areas already had disparities, and the digital divide, as it were, as if I may, is exacerbating the inequality further. And so this problem, the digital divide, or as we'll come to talk a little bit about, something called the homework gap, is not a new problem. It's certainly something that has existed in this country for more than a decade, probably almost 2 decades, almost for the extent of the entire lifetime of the commercial internet. And yet, certainly the circumstances of the past year have really amplified this inequity and brought it into sharp focus. So as I mentioned, I think this is really, this is really our chance to really invest, to do great research and scholarship in this area, to bridge scholarship to societal impact, public policy, and investment, and really move the needle for society here. So probably everyone in the room, or everyone in the Zoom, I should say, has heard the term digital divide. You may or may not have heard of the term the homework gap. Okay, and this is a term that I think I really hadn't heard of myself before about 3 or 4 years ago, until I started becoming more familiar with some of the work at the Federal Communications Commission, in particular the advocacy work of Jessica Rosenworcel, who was actually just appointed the acting FCC chair about 3 or 4 hours ago. But she's been talking about this particular aspect of the digital divide for some time, which is that there are a significant number of school children who don't have high-speed internet access at home. And that has, really come to a head in that they can't complete their homework assignments. Those students who have access to the internet have a much easier time getting their work done, getting educated, and so forth. And so, of course, that was an issue before, and now we're all online, and it's certainly even more. This gap is even more acute over the past 12 months than it was even before that. But not a new problem. It's a nationwide problem. It's also a challenge for our city. These statistics here in the green box, these are from a survey recently conducted by Kids First Chicago. Okay, I'll just read a few of them to you, but 110,000 children in this city under 18 do not have broadband internet access. Okay, and you can see where those disparities are from some of these other statistics and from this map. Now, this hasn't gone unnoticed, and it's certainly not without investment. So here's a story that I recently participated in with our local NBC affiliate on the digital divide issues in Chicago. And the city itself, and I should mention philanthropists, are well aware of the problem. There's a program launched late last year. You may have seen this, but it's called Chicago Connected. You can look it up. This is essentially an internet subsidy program funded by a philanthropy. So basically what that means is somebody or a few people gave a lot of money to the city to pay for commercial internet access for about 60,000 Chicago Public Schools households for households who are deemed to be eligible for the program. So that might, in a way, help address part of this problem in the short term, but I probably don't need to spend much more time explaining to you that that's not a long-term solution. And it's not a holistic solution either. It's great news for the short term, but even in the short term, there are questions about where those resources should be invested, and also how to demonstrate return on those investments. And so the homework gap problem and the digital divide problem is a nationwide problem. It's also one that really hits home, and as you can see here, it certainly hits right in our backyard, right in the backyard of UChicago. This is not a unique problem to cities either. There are several other large cities who are looking at this problem in very much the same way. Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York City being three others that are really kind of paying a lot of attention to this problem. But there are many. You may have voted. I hope you did. But if you voted in Chicago, you might have seen this on the ballot. There was a public question: should the city of Chicago act to ensure that all cities' community areas have access to broadband internet access? That was almost 90% of people voting in favor of that. So obviously this is non-binding and it didn't cost us anything. So, but regardless, I think that is certainly good news to see that there's widespread support and attention to this issue. I view the fact that it was on the ballot as a public question at all as a really positive sign that our municipal leaders are paying attention to this question. And as I'll talk about later in the talk, I can attest to you that there's a lot of attention being paid to this locally in our city. So just to step back for just an interlude for one slide, there's a couple of different aspects to, what's going on with COVID. And another aspect that I study in my research is how the internet performs. And one of the big questions, which, you may have read about or heard about or seen something about, is how the internet performed or didn't perform under stress, right? Everybody basically went home. They started working from home, going to school at home, et cetera. And, I think the reports of the internet's meltdown are greatly exaggerated. In fact, I think what effectively we observed, which is great news, is that you can see here, I basically showed previous couple years for a reference point. These are two ISPs anonymized, but these are like people you would buy internet service from. And then obviously the green ISP is a larger ISP than the pink one. So relative relative movement is really what you want to look at here. And you can see basically like that, essentially at the start of the lockdown, there was, a huge, spike in peak internet traffic at that time. And the ISPs themselves had to react to that surge. Some of them reacted better than others. Okay, so you can see here a bunch of different ISPs. I think one that's interesting that I'll point out to you is Cox Communications, which we don't have here in Chicago, but is a big ISP around the country. You can see actually that, so higher on this graph is worse. It means that like your delay is higher. So we're really looking at delay here. Cox is really interesting because around Christmas time, you can see that as everybody's home doing their shopping or whatever, their network also had a bit of a meltdown. And you can see their network similarly having, issues during the first part of the pandemic. And so, and there are a couple of, there are certainly other networks where you see blips of various kinds that certainly reflect stress during this red period, which is, since the pandemic started. So not everything is rosy, but I think one thing that we can certainly say is that, it's certainly not, some of the growing pains or the stresses are not materially worse than have, occurred in, previous to the lockdown. And I think the good news, and I won't show you more statistics on this because I want to get back to the main event. The good news is that internet service providers over the first and second quarter of 2020 reacted very quickly to add capacity to their networks to try to sustain some of these shifts in traffic. So there were very significant traffic shifts that we observed as people went into stay at home and lockdown. But overall, the internet itself demonstrated remarkable resilience. So that's actually good news. But of course, you had to have the internet in the first place for the good, for the good news to apply to you. Okay, so the internet has really survived the pandemic quite well. I could give a whole talk on the internet's resilience, and in fact, I'll invite you. I'll be at a panel in virtual Washington next week with the FCC and others at a conference called State of the Net, where I'll give a whole talk on the internet's resilience. But as I said, if you don't have access to the internet, doesn't really matter. And this is certainly, as I mentioned, been exacerbated by the current circumstances. And here's Commissioner Rosenworcel herself, again, talking about how coronavirus and the resulting stay-at-home orders and the need to school and work from home is really widening that gap. Okay. And here's a CPS parent. This is a quote from the report from that Kids First Chicago recently did on these effects as well. So this is a very good report from Kids First Chicago on this very topic. As I mentioned, investment is happening. I talked about Chicago Connected. Also, just a couple of weeks ago, the Federal Communications Commission put out a request for comment because they're doing basically an emergency COVID fund assistance. That's also a subsidy program. Essentially, what that program will do is for eligible households, provide a $50 a month subsidy to that household to pay for internet service. So a little bit different than the Chicago Connected program, but again, basically a subsidy program. Maybe effective as a stopgap measure certainly leaves us a lot to think about in terms of long-term fixes. There are other investments in this area. As I mentioned, this is not a new topic. People are investing in different ways to fix this problem. And that really brings me to the focal point of this talk, which is that this is not for lack of resources or will, right? What we're actually missing here is data and insights about where the problem is happening. Okay, so I'll show you some examples in the subsequent slides here about just bad data leading to bad information and hence bad outcomes, right? But I think one of the main things that I think is important to take away from my talk tonight is that investment is happening. We need more investment, I think, but we also need different kinds of investments, right? Not just subsidies. We need to be informed about where these problems are, what the sources of them, what the causes are, and that will help us ultimately direct our investments to the true crux and sources of these problems, and also importantly, demonstrate the return on the investment. Because right now, it's just, these are subsidies, but of course, even in the FCC's case, those are taxpayer dollars, right? And so is this money being well spent? Aside from the fact right now that money is being spent, it's tough to tell. And so ultimately, we're going to need better data on all of the above. Okay. And this really is, I think, a quintessential data science problem. This is something I think that really, this kind of project can only be done at a university like the University of Chicago, in a center like CDAC as part of the Data Science Institute, right? I think the projects like this can really only happen with an integrative approach with a broad lens. Here are just a few aspects to consider. Okay, so usually when we think about internet access, right? Who has it, who doesn't have it? It's usually some kind of riff on a speed test, right? I think everybody in the room probably has maybe run a speed test at some point, right? You go to some web page, you click a button, some needle goes like this, and it like gives you a number, and either it's what you're paying for or it isn't. Okay, and as I'll get into in a slide or two, 10 years ago, that was the right question to be asking. Right? Am I getting what I'm paying for? Let's click a button. Let's get a number. If it's not what I'm paying for, I complain, right? And the FCC has been working on that problem for a decade. Okay. Current understanding stops here, just about, okay? We've done a little bit of work on this next one, performance beyond the last mile. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But a lot of the stuff that's in the second and third bullets, we just don't know very much about right now, okay? You would be surprised to know that even the ISPs, even other people who should know where's the fiber in the ground, where's the coaxial cable, which telephone poles is it on for a given house, how far away is that from high-speed internet access? This is just like not well known in many cases, in particular in certain neighborhoods. We're working to fix that. I'll talk about it. Here's another shocker, okay? Chicago Connected gives away internet access for free to many eligible Chicago Public Schools households. Even if it's free, people don't sign up for it. Okay, so if that doesn't convince you that this isn't a purely technical problem or even a purely economic problem, then I'm not sure what will, right? But this, I think, comes to the crux of we really need to understand a lot more about everything from where is the infrastructure to even if we build the infrastructure, are people going to sign up for it? And if they're not, why? What is it that we need to be investing in to help eventually ensure that there's much more widespread adoption? And so really, this is what I mean when I say solving this, it really requires an integrative, cross-disciplinary, full stack approach. And so the pictures of the people on the front slide that I showed you encompass everybody from computer science to spatial data science to sociology and economics. And so we absolutely need to be taking a broad view of the problem. Let me kind of just rewind a little bit and tell you a little bit about myself. I kind of got interested in this problem in 2011. Measuring internet, sorry, I should say 2010. Our first publication on this topic was in 2011. Measuring internet speed. And I got into the topic because somebody gave me a data set. And I thought, oh, this would be cool. I'll look into this. I'll write a paper or two and be done. And it turned out that, the data, as the story goes, the data was garbage. I couldn't conclude anything from it. And I concluded that I needed to start building my own tools to do measurements of internet speed. And so we built the first router-based tool to measure the speed of your internet service provider. So that thing that you buy and you connect to the cable modem or your Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi router in your home, we wrote software that sits on that device and measures your internet speed from that point in the network. It so happens that that's an important place to conduct those measurements. I'll get into why in just a couple of slides. But the short answer there is if you're not measuring from there, you might be measuring your Wi-Fi network, you might be measuring your phone, you might be measuring your web browser. And so that turns out to be a very important insight. And it's one that the Federal Communications Commission ultimately adopted in their own methodology in something that's called the Measuring Broadband America report, which first came out in 2011, along with our research. And this year has entered its 10th year. I would argue now that we're sort of approaching the end of the road for this style of measurement and this type of report. But I'll explain why in just a few. We went on to study a lot of different things, like how fast does your network need to be to support the applications? Is the bottleneck in your performance? Is it your home Wi-Fi network or is it your ISP, and so forth? And like I said, this was a problem that I sort of came onto by accident, and it was sort of, it was appealing because it was like, okay, this is going to be easy. I'm going to basically, do a little data analysis, write a paper, and I'll get on with my life. And it just hasn't been that way. It basically kind of took over my entire reason for doing research. A number of things happened on the way to the university club. But one of the things that happened is that around the 2010, when we started working on this, I went to the FCC. They were soliciting input on test designs, and I was the only engineer in the room. And the discussion, was really of high import. It was what kinds of performance metrics are going to be included in this report? What's in, what's out? What kind of test methodologies will be used, et cetera? And I thought, wow, okay, first of all, I have a lot to learn because there are important decisions being made that I didn't even know were being made. And wow, we definitely need technologists in the room with essentially all of these lawyers who are making these decisions about the future of the internet. So I thought this was just fascinating. It was a simple question, right? Am I getting what I'm paying for? The technical underpinnings are profound. I won't get into them, for today for this audience, but you can have a whole research career on answering questions like this. I've kept busy for a decade so far. I think we're going to be busy for another decade. The questions are shifting. I'll talk about how in just a minute. And then just a great opportunity for impact socially and in the national policy arena. We've learned a bunch of different things. I'll just sort of relate a couple, from the early technical work. One is that speed has many facets. Let me go back to that slide. When you run a speed test, like from your phone, you'll get stuff like, download throughput, upload throughput, ping, which is really like, how long it takes for something to go from point A to point B, which is a different question than how much data can I move, in a given amount of time. How much data is being lost, and so on and so forth. So many aspects to speed. Depending on the technique you pick, depending on how you do this, you're going to measure different things. Okay, so if you do it a certain way, you'll measure the capacity of what Comcast is selling you, for example. If you do it a different way, you'll measure like your Wi-Fi network. If you do it another way, you might be measuring, you know, the radio on your cell phone. If you do it another way, you might be measuring like how fast a particular application can transfer data. That comes to the third point, right? There are many factors that can ultimately be the limit of a test that runs on a so-called client, like on a device. And I think this is actually something that we've always known, but it's just become incredibly important in the past few years, because as access networks have gotten faster and faster, the bottlenecks have moved, right? It used to be that you could run that speed test from your web browser and you could be reasonably certain that you were measuring your ISP. But now you might be measuring your phone or any of the other things I mentioned. Faster speed doesn't always mean better performance. There comes a point where you can just add more throughput and things don't get better, right? An analogy would be, we could make Lakeshore Drive, you know, 20 lanes wide, but you know, unless you drive 200 miles an hour, you're not getting from Hyde Park to downtown in, you know, less than 12 or 15 minutes, right? You're not going to get there in 3 minutes, no matter how wide the road is. Faster speed doesn't always mean better performance. For some applications, you know, like gaming or video conferencing, the limiting factor is latency. As speeds get faster, testing gets harder. Let me get into these a little bit more. This video, we may not get sound. And I think given the limited time, let me just play it. We'll see. I think we're not going to get sound, but that's okay. I'll just narrate it. This is a video we actually made in a project with the Wall Street Journal. We did a 3-year project with them, studying how fast does your internet speed need to be to support different applications. And the gist of this is that when you run a speed test, right, or when you buy speed from your internet service provider, when you buy a certain service tier, I should say, you're buying basically the link, the speed on a certain link from that provider into your home. But there are many other points along that path that could introduce performance limitations. It could be the client device, it could be your home network, right? If you throw the Wi-Fi router in the closet, that might not be the best thing to do. It could be functions or factors in the test, or how the test is designed.
Some are Amazon, some are Netflix.
And so there are a bunch of different reasons why when you run a speed test from something like this,
sorry,
you're not getting the number that your guys telling
from one network to another
until
it gets back to
a
you.
lot of reasons,
Or the content provider might pay a transit provider to carry the request back.
The other thing I think to note is that number, as speeds get higher, is increasingly irrelevant to the application performance. And one of the things that we looked at in the study with the Wall Street Journal, we had 60 homes participate in the study to see how did internet performance react or to higher speeds. And there comes a point when, you know, above a couple hundred megabits per second, you know, your Netflix or YouTube is just not necessarily better. The other thing, of course, is that, you know, there are bad tests. Okay, I won't get into the details of this. This might be, you know, given the limited time, a little bit too nitty gritty. But the plot here can show you something, right? So this particular test, it's called the network diagnostic test. Turns out to be a very bad diagnostic. Good on this box in red would be all the way over here to the right, somewhere near 1.0. This test basically is measuring like 70% of capacity in the best case scenario. And what you get when, you know, they publish, you know, it's great. They publish a lot of data. The only problem is the data is garbage. And so when you try to put it on a map, as sometimes people do, you get maps that look like this, that sort of indicate that, you know, there are wide swaths of Chicagoland without internet access, which just is, you know, it's not true. Let me skip that one and see. This is actually a related one, which actually showed up in the news, right? Staggering discrepancy in Pennsylvania between rural and urban broadband coverage, study finds. Well, according to this map, you know, there's almost none of Pennsylvania that has internet access. Only problem with the article is it's just not true, because the problem was with the tool. And this is a huge problem. Okay, so first of all, if the data is bad, it allows us, you know, it allows people to dismiss reports like this, particular people who might invest in solving the problem. Say, that data is bad anyway. Like, you know, this is, you know, nothing to see here. Okay, well, but the real issue, I think, is that this is just measuring the wrong thing, right? Remember that slide that I showed you with 10 points on it? And, you know, there are things immediately up from just a broken speed test that we could start measuring that would tell you a lot more, like, hey, how's the Zoom call going for someone in rural Pennsylvania, right? Or how's Netflix, right? And these are things that now, after, you know, about 5 years of research, we're finally getting a good handle on. We can infer the performance of applications like that. But we are still a long ways to go from, well, how's it going in remote school, right? So that's our challenge, right? That is I think that is the challenge for the next, you know, certainly in the next 2 years of the data.org project, but I think that's going to be the next challenge for the next 5 to 10 years, is really figuring out what this looks like for social outcomes, opportunities, and so forth. Another aspect, sampling techniques affect the conclusions, right? So a test like this, right, speed test, who runs it, right? People with internet access, people with phones, right? Connected to Comcast, right? People like me, okay? And so when you map that, like who's collecting data with that test to median household income, you can see that it skews towards higher income. The FCC data is a little better, but it still has that kind of sampling bias. And what the, you know, what should sort of, you should take away from that is that the areas that most need the investment are the ones that have, you know, the least data. Okay, so this is an issue. I've talked a little bit about this already, but, you know, certainly just to reiterate, we've been working hard on using router-based measurements, not just to measure speed, but also to measure application performance. So improving the quality of the tests, also improving our samples. As I mentioned, right, the internet is just a different place than it was 10 years ago, right? When we were first studying this problem, the question was, am I getting what I'm paying for, right? The biggest application on the internet in terms of just the amount of data being moved around was BitTorrent. In other words, you know, trading music and movies and things like that. Anyone who's an undergrad at UChicago 10 years ago probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. Now, right, it's just different. The speeds are almost, you know, 3 orders of magnitude bigger. That has moved the performance bottlenecks all over the place. That makes diagnostics way harder. And the bigger question now isn't, am I getting what I'm paying for? Because, you know, most of the time things work. It's accessibility, reliability, and also who doesn't have access and why. And so we've moved from, you know, over here where I could sort of keep myself very happy as a computer scientist answering a lot of these purely technical questions to a bigger question that is really necessarily interdisciplinary. And I should say that just over 2 years ago, I hosted a panel with Commissioner Rosenworcel herself. And it was at that point when I realized that I needed to do something bigger with my life and move from the left side of this graph left side of the slide over to the right side. And I will say that those discussions that I had with her and just thinking about how am I going to apply my own technical knowledge, my own research capability to problems that ultimately make society, make the world a better place. That is a big reason why I came to UChicago, is to work on projects like this. So now a little bit about the project, a little more about the project itself. I've blacked out, you know, I've redacted the table here because, you know, I think I was told these slides are going to be, or the video is going to be public, and I didn't want to show this publicly because this is a spreadsheet that the city of Chicago has shared with us, okay? And the reason that I'm putting this up is just, this is a sea change in how a researcher like myself would do research. Often we think of the questions, or we maybe consult with the city or an industry partner or whoever. They have a question, we're like, oh, cool, that's an interesting question. We go run off and do it, you know, and then maybe we check in a year or two later and say, hey, we solved it, right? And here's 10 research papers. This is just, working on this kind of problem is fundamentally different. The questions are coming from the city, and that's really our goal. In our discussions with our city partners, we're asking them, what would you like to know, right? As it pertains to the digital divide, as it pertains to the homework gap. And I'm going to show you some examples of these questions paraphrased in the remainder of the talk. But here's like the big takeaway here is that we need to map the questions that the city, that other civic partners are asking to the data, okay? If you look at NDT or some of the maps I was showing you, there's data out there. It's not great data, right? But worse, it's being used to try to answer questions for which it's not well suited. And this is why this is a data science question. This is why this is a question that if we crack it, I think we'll have just incredible social impact. And that's where the scholarship is too in data science, right? Here's a question. I want to derive insight from those questions. How do I map the data to those questions? And there are standard kinds of sampling questions that come up there, but it's more than just that, right? We're doing more than just running surveys and asking questions or gathering data in a standard way. There's also technical aspects because it's a new kind of data. And from that slide I showed you, it's really full stack. So this really requires the integrative approach that I was talking about at the beginning. Here's what we're trying to do with the city. Here's our moonshot: to foster inclusive innovation, foster inclusive growth, recovery, and resilience by ensuring those digital connectivity resources and the opportunities they provide are available to everyone. Okay, inclusive innovation, by the way, is one of the priorities of the Biden administration. And our hope is that as we try this, as we pilot this in neighborhoods in the city, we can demonstrate not only that there's value in this approach, but also that it can be scaled both across our city and to other cities across the nation, and I hope eventually nationwide. There's three real aspects. I'll talk about some questions pertaining to them in just a minute. One is a digital access toolkit that maps the data to the questions. Another is exploring the connectivity solutions themselves. How do you actually wire up a community, given what we learned from part one? And then third, how do you understand the relationship between connectivity and those downstream outcomes? Education, health, and the things I talked about at the very beginning. The first part is what we call digital access toolkit. And I will say this is preliminary. This is really still in design, right? We are really in the iterative, I would say, participatory design phase with the city. But ultimately, our vision here is to provide both maps, data portals, curated data sets that map those questions to the underlying data that can provide the answers. And so our goal here is not just to provide pretty maps, although we hope we have some of those too, and not just to provide data dumps, right? Although we hope to have those too, but also to provide tools that are directly responsive to the questions of our city partners. And I think that's where the challenge is. Nobody really knows how to do that yet. And so that's, I think, where some of the real innovation will come. As I mentioned, our intent really is for other people to use this, to copy it, right? And replicate it in their own communities and cities. And so the intent is to open source everything we do. As I mentioned, the approach needs to be holistic. We've got to, of course, incorporate the conventional speed metrics, right? But we also need to think about application quality. We need to think about user engagement, right? Particularly, we're interested in remote learning, questions about our users engaging with the content. That's an important consideration. As I mentioned, we need to know where the physical infrastructure is. And then I hope I also convinced you that we need to really understand these social questions to ensure a sustainable solution. And also ensure that whatever is invested in and deployed results in uptake. Here's just a quick snapshot of some of the data sets that we are starting with and some of our partners. And so due to the limited time, I won't enumerate this, particularly for this audience, but this is not the end of the story. This is really the beginning, right? So this gives you a flavor for the different types of data that we already are working with, and also the stakeholders who we are engaging with. Let me spend the last few minutes just highlighting a little bit of some of these questions. Okay, as I mentioned, we're at the beginning. I think the first question we've made progress on over the years, in particular with our investigative work with Wall Street Journal. One of the questions is, how fast does my internet need to be to support certain kinds of applications? We are fortunate that our partners have a similar question because we have a little bit of a jump start on that question. Some of the others that you see on this slide, I think, are a lot more challenging. They're a lot less studied. but we're excited to be working on them. As I mentioned, as speeds get faster, testing gets harder. The reasons I've already gone into, but this is just to sort of reiterate that. As speeds get faster, there are different ways to measure the network. So, in the interest of time, I won't get into the details, but a classical way of measuring the speed of the network is you just jam as much data into the network as you can, as fast as you can, and see when it breaks. This is essentially the gist of it. That obviously gets more challenging as the network gets faster. It requires more data to do that, right? Your test gets more expensive. The chances that the bottleneck is somewhere else goes up, and so forth. And so there's a different approach, which is you can listen on the wire, if you will. You can watch the traffic going by and try to infer what's going on. And that's what we did in the Wall Street Journal project. And that's part of what we do when we study application performance. This is, by the way, a fascinating machine learning problem. It's a statistical inference problem because all the traffic is encrypted. Okay, but we can do things like watch the traffic go by and say, aha, that's a 1080p video, or that's 720, or that's 320, or oh, a rebuffer just happened. Even though the traffic is encrypted, we can figure that out. And so that's where the research comes in. That's why this is computer science as well. I'm going to skip that video. It's just a demo to show that we've got a deployed toolkit. But here's an example of some of the things that we can do, right? So this is on somebody's home network. We can say, aha, like, here in this 5-second interval, we see, Hulu stream and a Netflix stream. And, we can see your utilization. And so we can map the quantitative context to a qualitative problem that a user might be saying, rebuffer happened, and so forth. And so again, this is challenging, right? Because we have to identify the applications as stuff is flying across the wire. And I think that's where it gets exciting from a technical perspective. I won't get into everything on this slide. This is basically an eye chart, but it's meant to demonstrate these are the types of things that we're considering with our city partners as we consider deployments. Okay, where do you deploy? Where do you take measurements from? You could take it from the browser. You could take it from an in-home device. You could do it in different ways in the home, as you can see on this slide. You could just take measurements off the network. You could sniff the network, so-called, listening in on the network. I'm just going to call it a wiretap right now, just, for, in the interest of time, that should indicate to you that there are privacy implications or not, depending on how you do these kinds of measurements, okay? So there are a lot of trade-offs. We're cognizant of all those trade-offs, particularly, again, I think the privacy-related trade-offs are extremely important to be cognizant of. They also present some really interesting technical problems as far as the research is concerned. I know we're coming up on time. So for these, I just have, these are all early stage. So I have basically one slide each to kind of show you where we're going. As I mentioned, question of interest, what's the level of fixed line internet connectivity in a neighborhood, various neighborhoods in the city? You would be surprised at how little information there is on that. And so we're getting creative here. We've probably all used Google Maps and maybe Google Street View. Okay, well, turns out that, those things are these 3D globe camera kinds of things. You can look up, down, all around, and this is a special kind of image. So you can look down, you can see manhole covers. Here's one that says, telecom or something on it, right? You can look up. This is the cell tower over in the Auburn Lagoon, Auburn Lakes community area, which, by the way, I love running down in that part of town. There's a beautiful little lagoon down there around 78th and Vincennes. And I always look for this cell tower because it tells me I'm almost there. But, point being, there's a lot of things that you can see with regards to physical infrastructure in public imagery. Now, the only problem is you got to recognize it, right? You got to know, like, oh, okay, well, that logo tells me that maybe there's some fiber under the ground, or, okay, that looks like a cell tower, right? And then, of course, even by hand, like as I was fishing this out and preparing this talk, I had to be like, oh, shoot, like it's occluded by the building, and oh, there's a tree in the way, and okay, let me go down this street and see if I can, right? So there's occlusions. Sometimes these cell towers, as they're meant to be hidden. So we've probably seen cell towers that look like trees, or there are others that you can't see because they're hidden inside of clock towers. And so that's where crowdsourcing and other types of things may come in, right? And so we're in the process of designing ways to combine publicly available data sets with crowdsourcing to get better data on this. This map that's behind here is from an application called Wiggle, which is a crowdsourced tool to map out wireless base station cell towers and so forth. Sustainability. So this is something that we've now just begun to study. We just put in a proposal on this last week to the US Ignite Foundation to see whether or not, once we've identified this, the source of, the causes of some of these problems, can we pilot some, connectivity projects in a few communities in the city? And I because we're short on time, and this is the only slide on this, it's early days. Not going to spend a lot of time talking detail here, but there's some really interesting technology that's being developed in the 60 gigahertz range and the unlicensed spectrum that's opening up some very interesting opportunities. This is not the end of the story. This thick black line here still has to be something. Whether in our pilot, that's probably going to be UChicago or other educational institutions. But for a long-term sustainable solution for our country, we're going to have to think about what that might be. Is it Comcast? Is it somebody else? Is it a combination of things? Lots of things to think about here. And then I don't have time to get into the details of how we picked these neighborhoods, but that was actually a rather thoughtful process, and it does relate to things like the existence of community-based organizations in those communities, the opportunity for community engagement and sustainability, and so forth. And so that's where some of our partners and co-investigators in the school, at the SSA school, like Professor Nicole Marwell and others, are really just critical to the success of the project. Finally, downstream impacts. And I think this is where, so I just talked about Nicole Marwell. She's right there in the upper right. We're also very interested in seeing how this maps to downstream effects like, education, health, medicine, social sciences. And you can see some of the questions that we are studying with some of our partners across the university as they relate to the digital divide and connectivity. So we are bringing in partners from across the university to study downstream effects. Megan Heising-Sheets in medicine, Louise Hockley at NORC, Nicole I mentioned, Elaine Allensworth is in the Center for Chicago Schools, Dana Suskins in medicine, Pedro Lopez is in computer science, Leor Strahilovitz is in the law school. And so really I view data science as the center of all of this, but of course, that's my biased view. In conclusion, bridging the digital divide is a grand infrastructure challenge for our next administration, for our incoming administration, and for our generation. The data really needs to be much more responsive to the questions that ultimately need to be answered to bridge this divide. It has to go beyond conventional notions of speed, and even beyond things like application performance measurement, beyond how Zoom or Netflix or YouTube. We need much more information about physical and socio-political infrastructure. These solutions will require not just computer science and data science, but also local civic engagement, economics, and policy. So with that, thank you for having me. Thank you for your attention. It's been a tremendous honor to present to this group. It's the first time, but I hope it's not the last. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, can you hear me, Dr. Feimster?
George?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Now I can. It was my audio.
No, that's no worries. Thank you for such a wonderful and fascinating presentation. So we have a few questions. I know we're coming up on time, so I just want to get a few of these out. We have one: is part of the disparity of access to high-speed internet a problem with the placement of cables and towers, etc.?
It absolutely is. I mean, in part, and that is a well-known contributing factor in rural. As well. I mean, one of the big issues with rural is that you need a return on investment. And so it can be very expensive to dig a trench and lay fiber for miles if you're only going to pass 1 or 2 homes. It's not going to recoup that investment. And so that is a hugely well-known issue in the rural digital divide. In the urban, it is also consideration, right? The same kind of return on investment issues come up. Of course, the economic considerations are a little different because you're not talking about digging trenches for miles. But yes, absolutely a consideration and concern.
Thank you. One question is just kind of asking about, it's great to have a high-speed internet connection, but what about having a device that will actually connect to it as well? And kind of how do you pair those two together beyond just having a phone? Yeah, so this is a great question. And I think thanks to whoever asked that, because I think the device is critical. If you don't have a device that can, support the Zoom call or the web browser or whatever, then the speed of your internet is, it's inconsequential. You need a device that can actually support the speeds as well. And so it's not something that we're particularly focused on in this particular project, but it is absolutely something that that a broader group of people who are working on this area are acutely aware of. And I think the city is aware of that as well. In addition to things like Chicago Connected, the Chicago Public Schools did have a Chromebook program, for example, to give devices to students who needed better devices. I think there's still, the jury is out as to, how good of a device is good enough. I mean, personal anecdote, but I think, even my own daughter was given a device from the school, very generous, by the way. And yet we concluded that we had a device in our house that we weren't using that was better than the one they gave us. So we said, hey, why don't you use this instead, right? So not everybody has that kind of privilege. And so hugely important to look at that aspect of the problem as well. And by the way, it's not just laptops and phones, right? It's also the Wi-Fi infrastructure. So that is something we are looking at, right? So it doesn't really matter if you have a really good internet connection, but it stops, at your wall, right? You need good Wi-Fi router as well. And that is that's absolutely something we're studying as well. Because a lot of people, ourselves included, right? You and me, check it after this call. Go plug into your wired router or go plug into your modem directly and see if your router isn't a bottleneck. I bet that it might be. Turns out mine was. I did this exercise about 2 months ago. And so, yeah, hugely important part of the problem. Thank you. So one question, the data test problem sounds like a proxy for a market structure issue. So, what's the incentive for providers to offer evidence that they could market better choices?
Oh, can you repeat that again? So which aspect?
Let me repeat out the entire question. So the data test problem sounds like a proxy for a market structure issue with limited competition between entrenched incumbents. In my suburb, basically it's a duopoly between Comcast and AT&T.
Right.
What motivation do they have to show where they come up short?
I think it's almost like that question is a comment, because I want to say you've hit the nail on the head. And I want to be careful how I answer that question, because I think different ISPs have certainly invested different amounts of resources into these kinds of problems. I would say in particular, Comcast certainly invested quite a lot in their Internet Essentials program and other programs of that sort. But that's quite varied. I think you're absolutely right to say that, the incentives here are not always aligned towards investment. I think coming back to that question of return on investment, sometimes there isn't one. And I think that's where we need to basically, that's why I think the city is thinking hard about this as well. It's not clear to me what the solution is there. That starts to get out of my realm of expertise, because we start talking about economics and economic telecom policy. But certainly one can go back and look at the history there and understand that it's quite complex, right? There have been municipal broadband efforts in the past which have failed. And sometimes they failed because of the incumbents.
So I actually have a question. How does the U.S. compare to other countries in regards to access and this kind of disparity in terms of high quality internet? And to a member's question, isn't this then a matter of public investment?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in sort of infrastructure investment in other countries, but I know a couple of things. So I'll just kind of offer a little bit about what I know, just kind of prefacing that this is not, it's not something I study, so I may be a little not totally up to date. But just to give you one example, right? Certain countries so I think, is this a matter of public investment? Yes, I believe it is. Okay, is it 100% public? I think that's a gigantic question mark, right? I mean, now this is personal opinion, really not an expert opinion, but I tend to think that this is going to have to be a combination of public-private investment. Okay, so in the mid-90s, right, the U.S. kind of turned their back on public infrastructure investment in the internet, and through the Telecom Act, right, and various other legislation, just kind of put it aside. And then the cable industry went gangbusters building cable infrastructure, right? And it's everywhere, right? And it's in large part to the investment of cable infrastructure that we have a nationwide internet infrastructure. And the investments in sort of pushing high-speed data over coax continue to this day, right? The DOCSIS spec has figured out how you can get full duplex gigabit speeds over the same infrastructure that was deployed decades ago. But that was private investment. And so I think, again, this is not my area of expertise, but, it's complicated, right? Because we've had a bunch of private investment, and now we've decided that this is a public good. And so, I mean, we haven't decided, it's just patently clear that it is a public good. And so, and as the previous question pointed out, the incentives are topsy-turvy. Mm-hmm. Right. So on the one hand, the incentives are topsy-turvy. We've decided that this is definitely a public good. And yet private industry has already poured billions of dollars into it. And so that's complicated. So I tend to think that the answer is going to be some combination of a public-private partnership in this country. But George, I think to your question, I think Europe and certainly other countries have done it quite differently to quite different effects. I mean, various countries in Europe have said, okay, from the get-go, the physical infrastructure is public. Like the government's going to spend the money to put the fiber in the ground, et cetera, fiber to the home, everybody. And now ISPs can come in and lease that infrastructure, right? And I think probably if we had to do it all over again, that we might have done it that way, but that's not where we are. And so we kind of have to figure out how to get there from here.
Thank you. One final question. Should there be a program to contact households that are not connected and could receive it for free in terms of the internet?
I think the question is, should there be? I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. And I want to say, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty confident that outreach of that kind is already going on, right? And so just to give it sort of end with an anecdote on that, right? The NTIA, a branch of Commerce, regularly runs a survey about internet access. And one of the things that they ask in the survey, for people who don't have internet access, they say, why, right? It's like, can you not afford it? Is it not available or whatever? So more than half of the people who haven't signed up for internet access, the answer is, I don't need it. Okay. And the question is a little bit obscure. What do you mean you don't need it, right? Unfortunately, the survey doesn't dig deeper than that, but some people have tried to dig deeper, and that answer is complex, right? So it's like people will say, well, I have Facebook on my phone, so like, what do I need Comcast for? I already have the internet, right? Or, what am I going to do with that? I don't have any need for that, right? So it's one thing to the question, I think, yes, it's important. We need to basically say, you can get subsidized internet, like this is available to you for free, but also, and here's what you might be able to do with it, and here's what it is, and here are the opportunities that this affords you. And then I think there are other complex issues with it as well. I mean, there are certain reasons that people won't sign up, even if the need is demonstrated. Like, you know, they may have unpaid bills, or they may have, you know, distrust of the government coming in and putting something into their house, right? And so there are a bunch of social issues, and I think that's where, you know, our collaborations with SSA and sociology and others on that front are just incredibly vital to the project.
Thank you. Well, I know that we are over time. So Dr. Thiemster, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and for spending time with us this evening. I also want to thank the whole team at the Graham School for making this whole series, this event possible. Again, I want to encourage members to check out the calendar for the upcoming events in this series. I do also want to note, which I think I do every time I'm on one of these Zooms, that the club is open and here for you. We have outdoor dining right now. We will go to indoor dining as soon as we're able to, so please keep your eyes peeled. We're available for takeout. Athletics is open with in-person group classes have restarted. They'll be starting on Monday, so check out the calendar for that. Changing rooms and showering facilities have also reopened as well. In the meanwhile, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, George William Price, Director of Collections. That's price@ucco.com. If there's anything I can do for you or anything any of the other staff can do for you, the club is here for you. Again, Dr. Thiemster, thank you so much, and hope to see you all very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge honor. Thank you so much.